Hello and welcome to The Quest on Rajya Sabha TV. I am Rakhee Bakshee. This show gives you a deep insight into the life, career and vision of a leading personality. And that leading personality this time is a veteran politician, a commentator and a prominent member of Rajya Sabha, Mr. Mani Shankar Aiyar. Welcome to the show, sir. Let's go back to your childhood in Lahore, in fact. And how was it like growing up in the family as it was?
I was born in Lahore, but we came across at partition. And I was only 6 years old at the time, so I don't really have any memories of Lahore. But when we came across here, there was nowhere to live. And so my father succeeded in finding a room with somebody who was a member of the Constituent Assembly. It was just one room and there were 6 of us living in it. And so my mother was very disturbed that our education was being totally disrupted. But my father didn't want to let us go. So she waited for my father to go on a business trip to Bombay and just kidnapped the two of us, my younger brother and myself, and took us to Dehradun and bunked us into school there.
But so your schooling actually was good. I mean, your academic, career profile, if we see, was quite good.
It was excellent. I mean, I went first to Welham Preparatory School, as it was then called, and then moved up to Doon School when I was about 11 years old. That was in 1952. And then my father died in an air crash a few months later. So my mother had to somehow make ends meet. And what she did was to negotiate a deal with the headmaster of the Doon School that we could continue as day scholars so as to save on the hostel expenses. And she also offered to teach Tamil during the rest hour. So I was compelled to learn some Tamil then. And if I hadn't had that grounding, I don't think I could have become.
But you started your, let's say, so-called literary career there. You started editing a magazine there in the school.
No, I think I was one of the editors, I can't remember, of the Doon School Weekly. I used to write quite a lot for them. Yes, that is where I started. I discovered that I could write and I wanted to write. And one of the essays I wrote, I suddenly found in a collection of adventure stories by Doon School boys about how they climbed mountains and went into jungles for shikar. And this was a purely imaginary story that I'd written called The King of the Ibexes. And it was so realistically done apparently that they thought I'd actually gone to Ladakh and seen this ibex standing on the ledge of a mountain and then at the last moment refrained from killing it because I couldn't bring myself to kill this magnificent animal.
The seeds of this knowledge that you gain at the school and college level actually gets you a lot when you grow up and when you are grown up actually. So how much do you carry of that? I
think almost everything. We had a remarkable teacher, an Englishman called Ronald Holdsworth, and he had this injunction that you have to have the inquisitive Greek spirit in you. And when we were in our final class, he used the expression, and let the punishment fit the crime, the punishment fit the crime. And none of us in the class knew what he was talking about. So he said, you're about to appear for your senior Cambridge exam and you don't know the Mikado. And we said we didn't. So he stopped all classes and sang the whole of the Mikado to us.
Which was interesting.
So, well, I mean, it's the kind of broad education that you succeed in getting. And I must say, for all its faults, and there are many, the Doon School did provide one. With a pretty good
Then came Stephens and later Cambridge. So how would you look at those years?
Well, the first thing I'd say that in my day, you never called it Stephens. You called it St. Stephens. So I went to St. Stephens and then, I did economics there. And when I consider that you have to get, I think, 99.9% to get into economics honors at St. Stephens, my own story is so remarkable that I can't believe it myself. I'd applied to do political science at St. Stephens. And when I fetched up for the interview, late incidentally, the Balbir Singh, who was in charge of me, he said, but don't you know that we don't teach political science in St. Stephens? So I said, really? And what else do you teach? So he said, well, would you like to take an economics honors exam course? And I said, yeah, sure. And that's how I got into economics honors. But then I was a very middling kind of student, but somehow luck held with me. And at the end, in my BA honors exam, I not only stood first in the university, but I was way ahead of everybody else. I don't know how I got that result, but the result was so shocking for my economics professor, whose favorite student was Arun Shourie, someone else whom you should get on this program, that he refused to congratulate me. And I wrote about this many years later. He read it, and when I returned, it was 20 years later, I was at St. Stephen's, and he said I'd insulted him by mentioning this. So I said, you didn't congratulate me, but it's not too late. And 21 years after I got my first,
interesting to get those insights from you about those days. But the Cambridge experience gave you a lot.
That was the definitive experience. Because when I got there, I was certainly among the more impecunious students. Now you get about £600 a year, a month, is the minimum that is needed to survive. Our allowance was £600 a year. And it was enough to be in college during the 6 months of college. But during the 6 months of leave time, when you had to fend for yourself in terms of food and accommodation and so forth, my main memory of Cambridge is hunger and cold. Terribly cold.
How would you look at it if you have to briefly sum up the experience?
But I now look back, it was definitive because despite all this, I'd set my heart on making my mark at the Union. And my peer group is the only one in the history of the House of Westminster to have, for Cambridge to have dominated over Oxford. So I really won my spurs against a very tough team. So and they were the ones who constituted the cabinets of Maggie Thatcher in the second part of her term and John Major. And there I got elected Secretary of the Union. I lost the presidency by 6 votes.
Do we see the seeds of what you're now there in Cambridge in terms of any political
if it
connection?
Perhaps if it hadn't been for Cambridge, I would never have succeeded in realizing my childhood dreams of being in politics. Because at the Cambridge Union, canvassing was not permitted. But there was a fellow...
We will take this particular Cambridge experience and your entry to politics further ahead. But right now we are going for a very short break. But don't go away. Do keep watching this very interesting conversation with Mr. Mani Shankar Aiyar. And you are watching The Quest right now. You're watching The Quest. We are talking to Mr. Mani Shankar Aiyar, and from Cambridge, as we were talking about before we went on to the break, was your interest in politics, or rather your journey towards politics?
Oh, absolutely, because having won election as Secretary of the Union, incidentally, my president was the only survivor of our generation in today's David Cameron cabinet. He's Ken Clark, Minister without portfolio. I ran for president. And the Cambridge tradition is that you don't canvass yourself and nobody canvasses for you. But there was an Indian student in the college next to mine who went around, I learnt many, many years later, meeting up with other Indian students and saying, look, yaar, there's an Indian running, the least you fellows can do is to go and vote for him. His name was Rajiv Gandhi. I didn't know him. So since he began his political career canvassing for me, I think it's entirely appropriate that I should end my political career canvassing for him.
And since you've taken this name of Rajiv Gandhi and you've been such a, an aide to him also and assisted and worked with him so closely, how would you like to look back today, Rajiv Gandhi as a leader, as an individual?
I think it was the golden moment certainly of my life. And nothing has happened subsequently which matches the sheer joy and excitement of working with the Prime Minister of India, and that too as closely as I had the opportunity of doing. And
how would you like to exactly look at this association? I mean, if you have to really put it...
It was between a Prime Minister and a Joint Secretary. I was very fortunate there. Because I didn't really know him before I joined the PMO, I was able to establish a purely official relationship with him. I didn't have any baggage of being a yar or a friend to overcome to work with the Prime Minister. Several of his colleagues did, and many of them fell by the wayside on not being able to make that adjustment. But I didn't need to make the adjustment since I didn't really know him at either school or Cambridge. We had barely any interaction. So it was a purely official relationship. But it was an official relationship that tended to get a bit intense because about 3 or 4 months after I joined him, he asked me to become his sole speechwriter. Because other people, until then, everyone in the office was contributing the drafts which related to their respective subjects. And Rajivji said that, you know, he needed to project a world view within which specific subjects were dealt with, and that world view required one writer. And in consequence, I must have drafted about 1,000 speeches for him, of which some were required they were the ones that he read out, didn't use his notes. And the ones that he read out, he was very pernickety about. And for example, his famous speech at the United Nations on disarmament, it went through 17 different drafts before we managed to get it as he wanted it. So he used to internalize his thoughts by working on this. So I make no claim to having written the speeches. I was, if you like, the merchant of words. I provided the words with which to clothe his thoughts. But that did mean that I had to interact very closely with him. I had to listen to him very carefully when he was speaking extempore from my notes to find what was it that he left out and what was it that he added.
From somebody who was into foreign service to finally understanding the ground realities of India, and finally Panchayati system was something that you really worked on. How would you look at that, I wouldn't say contrast, but two worlds?
No, it's not. In the foreign service, you're very much involved on a daily basis, 7 days a week, in understanding and projecting India. Because if you don't project India, you can't really interact with the counterpart. And my foreign service experience had taken me to several different parts of the world. So I went twice to Brussels, including dealing with the problems that arose out of Britain joining the common market and abandoning us without Commonwealth preferences in what was then our single biggest market. I worked in Vietnam, in Hanoi, at a time when I was the only diplomat whom the Americans hadn't attempted to kill, because on the day I reached there was the day of Lyndon Johnson's bombing halt. I then worked in Iraq, and finally the posting that made the biggest impression on my mind was being in Karachi. And in all these postings, one had to explain India, which meant one had to understand India. So I never felt when I returned that I was leaving one world and entering another one. I felt that I was in the same India, but involved abroad in one face of India and involved within the country in another face of India. And a lot of what I learnt outside India is what drove me towards my current interests. For example, Panchayati Raj, which is what really brought me close to Rajiv Gandhi, I had picked up the rudiments of it by seeing the commune system in Belgium. Now, the city of Brussels has only 1 million inhabitants, but it's got 19 municipalities, which they call communes. And I saw that the communes did all the work, which needlessly today is being done by the state government or the central government in India.
But how this brilliant concept has traveled today, how would you look at this idea? Which grew here in India and very appropriately, but how much has it traveled to its actual,
destination? Well, we've made Panchayat Raj ineluctable, irremovable and irreversible. Nobody can get away from the constitutional obligation to have Panchayat Raj. And when I survey the last 20 years, implementation is extremely uneven, from being outstanding in Kerala to being disastrous in Uttar Pradesh. But everywhere, if you compare in any state what it was like to what it is now, you see progress.
So can you say among the various portfolios and significant ones that you held, this one was really close to your heart?
Well, this one was a portfolio created for me because I was the first ever Panchayat Raj minister in India. The ministry was a gift to me by Sonia Gandhi in recognition of my association with her husband on this subject. And I've continued to be deeply involved with it. I've just finished a 1,500-page, 5-volume report on how to leverage Panchayat Raj institutions for the more effective delivery of public goods and services. And so it's been a continuing passion for the better part of 50 years. Because the first time I heard of it, I was an undergraduate at St. Stephen's when Jawaharlal Nehru lit the lamp at Nagaur to start Panchayati Raj in our country. So I've always felt that democracy is meaningless unless it involves the poorest people.
What a beautiful line to take a break on actually, and we'll continue this conversation. But right now again we are going for another short break and we'll come back very shortly. Don't go away, keep watching The Quest. You're watching The Quest. We are talking to Mr. Mani Shankar Aiyar. One would say also that, you know, you're somebody who's seen as literary, you're a commentator, but you say things that create controversies. And why is that? Because
I like to be myself. And I have my own views. They're often eccentric. I think several of my fundamental beliefs are Jurassic Park. I think many of the things I say today, had I said them 40, 50 years ago, it would have been regarded as parroting Nehru or Gandhi. But you say it today in the 21st century, you believe in non-violence, you believe in nuclear disarmament, you believe in socialism. Yeah, I believe in all of them. And when I say that my most passionate interest is Panchayat Raj, they want to know why it is not the stock market. Well, I was born several decades too late, and I've lived far too long. So
you say your voice and the atmosphere, there is a gap there.
There's a gap between how I perceive India, the priorities I have in my mind for India. I believe that all these are the fundamental Congress precepts, which is why I'm in the Congress. But I do feel that the country has moved in a different direction. Our politics and our policies have certainly moved in a different direction.
Somebody who has seen Congress party so closely and have been in it for so many long years, how would you look at this whole shift that one is talking about with the youth getting more involved, with Rahul Gandhi now becoming the vice president of the party?
There's nothing new about the youth getting involved. Maulana Azad became president of the Congress at the age of 35. And Jawaharlal Nehru became president at the age of 40. And Subhash Chandra Bose became president, I think, at the age of 42. So we've always had a combination of youth and experience. And the party has survived for over 125 years only because as new streams join it, they're allowed seamlessly to enter the mainstream. And then some of us disappear, like I've disappeared, and others, like several of the others you have on this program, continue to be stars of our political firmament. But at no stage have younger people not been allowed to come. So I see absolutely nothing new about several young faces having entered the Congress in recent times and being regarded as our shield, our shield bearers for the future. That is what the Congress is like.
You know,
and don't forget that Mahatma Gandhi was called the Mahatma when he was 45 years old. He was only 3 years older than Rahul is today when he became the Mahatma. So we've always been a party of the youth.
What a comparison it is. But looking at the current political scenario and the way politics is moving, how would you look at the political structures being made? I mean, one is talking about coalition politics being here to stay. One is talking about regional parties getting more center stage. So how would you look at the polity today?
I think in many ways these are desirable things. I think trying to have one party government in a country as diverse as ours does mean that diversities would tend to be subsumed in a somewhat artificial unity. So coalition politics is not such a bad thing. And many of the most successful countries, democracies in the world, have been coalitions forever. Germany, Italy, France and so forth. So this idea of single party government is a British eccentricity and we don't have to ape the mother of all parliaments in the same way. But what does concern me is that we have, for example, Jayalalitha, very prominent, and Karunanidhi, very prominent in Tamil Nadu, not one seat in Andhra Pradesh. Jagan Reddy, emerging in Andhra Pradesh, not one seat in Orissa. Naveen Patnaik, dominant in Orissa, not one seat in West Bengal. Mamata, queen of everything she surveys
so quite bizarre,
in Bengal, not one seat in Bihar. And most interestingly, these are all different languages, but in Mughal Sarai, no one can beat Nitish Kumar, and in Varanasi, Nitish can't get a seat. So, is there a danger that the rise of the states will also signal a kind of vociferousness in our
polity. You
told
me the rise of the states of Telangana, which is now a reality. How would you look at this?
Well, I think the question of Telangana has been on the boil now, really for the better part of 60 years, but certainly in a very major way in the last 10 years. And all angles have been looked into. There's nothing else that one could look into. And therefore a decision was waiting to be taken. And it's now been taken.
What about other demands now of other states like Haryana?
I see no reason why they cannot be taken into consideration. We don't know whether making a small state is a good idea or not. Certainly the experience of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand would appear to indicate that you should be careful about small states. But you look at the experience of Himachal, the remaining rump Punjab and Haryana, they've done very well. Uttarakhand is not doing too badly. So I don't think there is an argument for or against small states. Small states can also be made to function well. In my own area of Panchayati Raj, I'm very impressed with what Sikkim is doing and Tripura is doing. So there's no reason why states should be big or small.
Now I would like to take now in front of you is Mr. Narendra Modi, who is trying to make an impact on the political horizon once again. How would you look at whatever BJP has done to its own party?
I think he's the best thing that happened for the Congress, because as a result of his rise, the BJP is divided and fragmented, and the NDA is alienated. And therefore, an opportunity has been given to the Congress, which was quite a punching bag till fairly recently, to now re-emerge on the national scene. And recent polls that I've seen, I don't much trust these polls, but to the extent to which they reflect to a certain extent ground realities, it would appear that my instinctive feeling that the man belongs to the center of India, stretching from Kutch to somewhere in Chhattisgarh, the Modi magic runs out. He's not relevant to the north, he's not relevant to the east or the northeast, he's utterly irrelevant to the south. So it's a very good thing that this niche leader has been picked up by the BJP at an immense cost to themselves to become the leader of the opposition. Thank you very much, Narendra. Oh, namo, namo. Thank you very much for ensuring that there will be a UPA 3.
Another big question which largely concerns and almost in every party and to almost everybody is the issue of corruption and morality in politics. And how would you look at this whole concern that is being...
I go back to Karl Marx. He said that the superstructure of a society, that is its moral values, its institutions, they also depend on the relationship of different classes of society to the means of production. So if you have rampant capitalism, you're bound to get rampant crony capitalism. There's no way in which you can have capitalism without crony capitalism. The history of Japan and the Saibatsu shows it. The history of America and the robber baron shows it. The history of the United Kingdom and the rapacious capitalist class there shows it. So if we are going to have the market be dominant at the commanding heights of the economy, we're bound to have corruption. Because the fount of all corruption is the corporate sector. And that is why
You're saying it at a time when corporate sector looks very appropriate at this stage, I would say.
The corporate sector writes letters to the Prime Minister saying that he had better make his ministers honest. Why don't they write letters to their fellow members of the CII and ASSOCHAM and FICCI? They're the guys who are giving out the bribes, who love to give it out to expedite their own cases. They're the ones who are sending 56% of India's national income. Nobody knows what the source is, and they're the ones who are utilizing the Mauritius route for round tripping. So if we are going to have unbridled market economics, we are going to have unbridled corruption. What we need to understand is that while corruption is a most undesirable thing and needs to be battled, it needs to be battled by society as a whole and not by finger pointing only
And very brief answer on Mani Shankar Aiyar's road ahead, the dream.
I'm 72. I'm sidelined by my government. I'm sidelined by my party. I have only a future on television shows. But I'm content. I have now reached the stage where from the Grihastha ashram, I'm ready to move towards the Vanaprastha ashram. And if in fact the party succeeds in making the elected Congress representatives in the Panchayats, the foundation of the organization of the party, and the government of India accepts the recommendations my committee has made for center staging Panchayati Raj in administration, in planning, in implementation and delivery, then I think I can quite happily go into the Vanaprastha stage of my life.
Thanks a lot and all the best for your confidence, Mr. Mani Shankar Aiyar. And that was an interesting conversation we had with this man, the leader, Mr. Mani Shankar Aiyar. Hope you watched this edition of The Quest and found it interesting too. Thanks for watching. Namaskar. Bye.